Now the first question we're going to begin with is, what kind of paint do I use? Okay, there's two different types of paint primarily that are used by model builders, miniature painters, and I guess action figure collectors who like to customize their action figures. The first would be acrylic paint, okay? And that's the one we're going to be using today. That's the one I suggest you use. The second is enamel paint, which is a lot harsher and takes a lot longer to dry. Acrylic dries pretty quickly and is the most commonly used. So 110% make sure you use acrylic paints, alright? There's different brands you can use. I'm using a war game kind of set that I bought off of Amazon. I personally like it, and I will show you some pictures of it before we start. But another brand that I began with that really helped me learn that was beautiful was Vallejo. Vallejo Model Colors specifically is a fantastic brand, and I highly, highly suggest you use Model Colors. They're very cool. Aside from that, there is Tamiya acrylic paints. That's another one, and Testers. I believe Tamiya has acrylic paint, but Testers is the other one that is really, really popular. I personally have not used Testers. I just have used Vallejo, so I'm going to recommend you Vallejo. It's worked great for me. Feel free to explore though, try different options. I know Hobby Lobby carries pretty much all of the paints that I'm talking about, so that's a great place to hit up, honestly. The second thing you're going to want, which is very important, is primer, okay? You need to prime the surface of something, typically before you paint it. This can vary and can be kind of adjusted. If you sand something down and you're like, oh, probably shouldn't prime it, you might not need to. Or you might just want a really, really thin coat of it. But I definitely recommend getting surface primer. Right now I have some Vallejo acrylic primer. Make sure it is acrylic primer. And make sure you don't go to Walmart or something and get some crappy spray primer. You don't want to do that. I did that when I first started. I got some spray primer. You don't want to do that. Make sure you get primer that is specifically for like model kits, man. So Vallejo or Testers or Tamiya. There's some other brands out there. I know there's Citadel paints. I've heard mixed things about those. I have not used them. Some people love them. But make sure you have a primer that is meant for plastic, like miniatures here. Here's some that I've painted. I have a bunch up here. So make sure you have the right primer. Okay, primer is very important. So once you have primer and paint out of the way, another thing you're going to really need is thinner. Alright, you need to be able to thin your paints. So you can't squirt your paint and then just start painting. You need to take a medicine dropper like this, take maybe just a drop of this stuff and drip it into your paint. Alright? And where are you going to put your paints? In a paint tray. They're super cheap. Get a paint tray. And then the last thing you're going to need when you're all done with it and you've let it sit and cure for a few hours or days, it really depends. I mean, with these miniatures here, I honestly painted these in one night. It didn't take long because they're just so tiny, man. But if you're painting a full action figure or something and you have a few coats going down, I definitely suggest you prime it. Maybe let it sit for 24 hours. My bottle here, this primer says it can sit for 12 hours. Honestly, you might be fine doing it if you have really thin coats and you sanded it a little bit and you're like, okay, I cleaned it, sanded it, it's probably fine. Maybe it is. You can be the judge of it, but honestly, for your first time starting out, you can never go wrong with waiting. Wait for 24 hours to 48 and you should be good to go. Aside from that, once you're all done priming and you paint it, you're going to want to let the paint sit for a day or two. That's definitely the smart choice to do. And then you want to varnish it. And varnishing it is quite important, and we will talk about that right now. That is something that I struggled with a little bit because there's different types of varnishes, which I will show you right now. Now, a really important aspect of this is the varnish. And one thing I failed to mention about the primer is make sure you thin your primer too, just a drop. And you also want to make sure you thin your varnish as well. And make sure it's an acrylic varnish. Here I have two Vallejo varnishes, and this is the interesting thing. You can get gloss and matte varnish. I'm not sure if there's other types. I'm not like incredibly skilled, but I painted enough to know there's two different types, matte and gloss. Gloss is obviously glossy. Matte is just more like this, just a flat kind of look. And I prefer the matte. I like it, but it really varies. Depends on what look you're going for. I believe I put a matte varnish on this guy. It's a little glossy looking though, especially on his little drape and skirt here. But The glossy obviously gives it a glossier look, and if you're like painted some clothing on something, I definitely wouldn't use the gloss. Unless it's like leather clothing or something, or maybe you're doing a sword or something, you want a shinier look, yeah, use the gloss, but there are metallics for that too, but I prefer to use the matte. But make sure you thin these before you use them, and don't put a load of thinner in there, man, because you will ruin your painting and stuff. So just a little bit of thinner, you'll be fine. And a great thing to do is mix it with toothpicks. Toothpicks can also really be helpful if you're painting small details. When I'm painting miniatures or a small detail on a figure, I use toothpicks on pretty much 90% of this guy. Honestly, I rarely use brushes on a miniature. So varnish, thin, use some toothpicks, thin your primer, thin your paints. Thinning things is important. Make sure you do that. Now, the one thing that I did not realize until later on, I read this in a forum that I was on Reddit. Use Pledge. Pledge is a great varnish. Sometimes I just put a coat of varnish on it, and then I put some Pledge on it. Sometimes I mix both of these together. It really, you'll get a feel for it. But Pledge is a great varnish to use. It is glossy though, so if you're not looking for the gloss look, maybe put some matte over it. All these guys here, I used Pledge on, and when you scratch with that paint, it literally is not going anywhere. It's not scraping off at all. Where before, honestly, when I used some varnishes that came with like other painting kits I had bought, they didn't really work that well. But it wasn't until I started using Pledge that I was like, oh my god, my paint is not going anywhere. This is a firm paint job. So I definitely suggest using Johnson Pledge. It's just a floor gloss, so it's obviously going to look very glossy, so make sure you put some matte over it if you don't want the glossy look. Okay, so this stuff works great. Cool thing you can use. Aside from that, there's some other things you're going to want. Obviously, this paint here. If you want to take off factory paint, and you might, like with these eyes, I'm hoping you can take them off. You're going to want to use 91% isopropyl alcohol. Make sure it's 91%, otherwise it probably won't work. I believe it's 91%. We'll find out, but so far this has worked for me. You're going to want toothpicks. That's important. Another thing you're going to want that a lot of people don't tell you about is a toothbrush. A toothbrush is very handy, because before we paint this guy, we're going to want to clean him off. So make sure you have a toothbrush on hand, okay? Because what you're going to do is get a little tub here of warm, soapy water. I use a little bit of dish soap. Make sure you're using good dish soap, I guess. And you scrub off whatever you're going to paint. But first, before we clean him off, you're going to want to sand him. It helps these surfaces so the paint can adhere to it better. So what you do is you literally just sand it a tiny bit. Make sure you have a really gentle sander. You don't need to like frickin' trim chunks out of him. I know I was sanding my shit way too hard. Aside from that, you're going to need some paint brushes, obviously. And the toothpicks, like I said, are very important. And then it wouldn't hurt to have some extra tools. You know, an X-Acto knife can be handy. These little snippers here. Tweezers too can be great if you're holding a small piece. For instance, if I pop off Goblin's head here and I want to paint Goblin's head, I can just pinch it with the tweezers here. And that actually helps, man, because then I'm not putting my nasty hands all over it. Another thing you can do that a lot of people recommend, especially with like harsher paints and stuff, is using gloves. And, you know, on that topic here, why did I put his head here? What was I doing? I'm an idiot. On that topic, if you're using enamel paints, if you're priming something, if you're opening up your thinner, like this here, you don't want to inhale that. Make sure you're not breathing that in. Wear a mask, man. Which, geez, I'm such a bastard for saying that because I do not have a mask on me. But you'll probably be fine. You definitely should wear a mask though. Don't follow suit with me, man. I'm doing that wrong. You want to wear a mask. If you don't have a mask, seriously keep it a distance away. Don't breathe that shit in. It can cause cancer and stuff. It's pretty bad for you, so don't mess with that. And lastly, have a little platform or something to paint on. Make sure you have some paper toweling here. And make sure you have a towel as well, just so nothing gets wet around you. But yeah, have a little platform to paint on so you don't get anything dirty on wherever you're painting. Aside from that, we've gone over everything you're going to need. And yeah, let's jump into this and I'll show you exactly what I'm doing and I'll walk you through the process. So with Goblin here, I want to paint two things. I want to fix these eyes. Everything else is fine, aside from his nutsack chin. And I want to paint the metallic buckles on this purse. So what I'm going to start off doing first is, since there's obviously some factory paint on these eyes, I want to brush off that factory paint. So what I did here is I put a little bit of the isopropyl alcohol in this little cup here. And I'm just kind of dipping it with my brush. I recommend using a cotton swab, but I do not have any on me now. I'm just kind of wetting his eyes with it here. Then I'm taking the towel I have next to me and just kind of rubbing the eyes off. And it's starting to come off, but it's going to take me a bit longer than typically I would. But you can see it's really starting to come off there. So I'm just going to clear these eyes off completely, honestly. Because, I don't know. The yellow's really fine. It's just those pupils are awful, but you can't really get the pupils off without getting the yellow off. I mean, you could just paint over that yellow, but you're probably better just to paint over the plastic that's already there. You don't really want to paint over that paint. So, yeah, we'll scrape these off, and then you guys can see how it looks without his whacked ass eyes. Okay, so already these eyes are looking so much better now that they're gone. Man, I can just see it happening now, how great this is going to look. So we have the eyes completely cleared off. I put some 91% isopropyl alcohol on it. And you can see in the video there, I did end up using a toothpick just to get around the edges. So what I did was I just wiped the alcohol on with a paintbrush, and then I just kind of picked at the details with a toothpick. Just be really careful when you're doing it. You don't want to ruin anything. But now that we got this all cleared off with the propyl alcohol, why don't we sand this a little bit, and then we will clean it. Okay, so here's the head, and all I'm going to do is take this really, really soft nail filer and just kind of go over the eyes a little bit. It's just to get factory chemicals off. At least that's what I've seen in other things. That's what I learned when I started doing this. You could take a harsher filer. I mean, I'll grab one here. I'm going to be really, really light about it because I don't want to like make these eyes look horrible, you know. You don't want to ruin the plastic at all. But at the same rate, you do want to get a little bit of sanding in just so you don't like mess up anything, you know. So you have a really like harsh metal filer here, but I'm just going over like super lightly. I do not want to ruin anything, man. Especially because this is really kind of a softer plastic. You can see I have like small scrape lines on his eyes. Nothing that'll be terribly noticeable. Just kind of going over a little bit. Nothing terrible. Pretty easy on the eyes. So I'm going to say that's honestly about good. I don't think this terribly needs to be sanded terribly, but all you have to do now is clean off these eyes. Okay, so here we have the toothbrush, and it's pretty easy. Sometimes I just kind of dunk his head in there, and I just scrub him off a little. And that's it. It's really not a crazy process. Should mention too, make sure you wash your hands before you do this. My hands are very, very clean. I did wash my hands before I did this, so I should be good to go. Otherwise, just wear gloves. But that can be kind of a pain in the ass, so I just wash my hands really clean, and you're good to go. Once you're done with that, I just kind of dip him in the water again, brush him around, and then I dab him off on a paper towel here. So just kind of dab it off a little. And he's pretty much good to go. And we can start painting the eyes. But you want to make sure it's totally dry. So, once we got this done, I'm just going to prime this guy. I'm going to let it sit. Honestly, I might just let this primer sit for not like super long. I'm not going to put like a very heavy coat of it on. I just want to demonstrate to you what exactly you have to do. That's the purpose of this video. So, I mean, in your case, I would definitely put the primer on for quite a few hours. But we'll see how it works out for me. Let me be your reference. I'll be your lab rat. So let's see how this goes. Before you use your primer or drop it, make sure you shake it up like crazy. You just want it to be a little shook up so it mixes well. And here's one of the paints that I got. It's a War Paints set. My father actually ordered it for me because I had told him to order Vallejo model color, and I was like, dude, why did you get War Paints? I don't know what the hell this is. And I found out these work very, very nicely. So I recommend them. I will drop a link down in the description to these paints, so I highly recommend them. And go through my links there. I'll drop links to some different primers and stuff you can use, and yeah, you'll be able to go pick out all your stuff if you look at my description. So first off, I want to start by saying, do not be afraid to mix colors. Mixing colors gives you some of your best looks, in my opinion. So I'm just going to try this out, and I don't know, we'll see how it goes. Also, make sure your paint tray is really clean. Mine's a little dirty, but it'll be fine, probably. Just this inner piece here is dirty from mixing colors and shit, but we should be good to go. So what I'm going to do is use this moon dust here. I don't know if you guys can see that very well. It says War Paints Moon Dust, and I'm just going to put a little drop in. You really don't need that much, man. So that was even a little bit too much. Got my moon dust in there. You can see that. Then I'm going to use this yellow, the demonic yellow. And I don't know, maybe I don't need the moon dust, honestly, but it might darken it a little bit with that. Then I'm going to use gray in there. So I think that gray might darken it just a little bit, those two yellows. And I might get the look that I'm looking for with just a tiny, tiny drop, okay? And then you're going to want to use your thinner, like I said. So here's your thinner. All right, I'll pull this out here for you and focus it in. I'm just going to screw off the cap. I am going to cover my face with my shirt just because I do not want to breathe it in. Just get a tiny baby drop. Okay, so here we have a bunch of it, honestly. All you got to do is drop it in there maybe once or twice. And these war paints too. Some paints are thinner than others. You might find a paint that's like, oh my god, this is already really thin. So you might not have to thin it too much, but you're always going to want to put a little bit of thinner in there, at least, even if it's just a tiny amount. That'll just help. So all you got to do now is pull your brush out, whatever brush you want to use. I'm going to use a little bit of a bigger one, just because I want to cover those eyes. I'm going to wipe it off here on this towelette. Then I'm just going to mix this up. As you can see, we'll see what kind of color it produces. If it's absolutely horrendous, we'll redo it. But so far, I'm liking how it's looking. It doesn't look too bad. I'm going to say it's a pretty fair color. I think that's decent. So we'll use that and see how this goes. So after you mix up your primer, make sure, or shake it up. When you put it in, it's a milky consistency, like it is right here. It's hard to see because it's all white. So you can darken it a little bit. You can see the primer in there. You want to make sure it's a milky consistency. You want to put 1 or 2 drops of thinner in, barely anything, just like we did with this yellow paint. And then you're going to want to lightly coat it on his eyes, which I already did a little bit, but I will re-demonstrate because I thought I was recording when I did it, but apparently I wasn't, and I'm a fucking idiot, so that's a bummer. So all you want to do is make sure your brush is dry, dip it in a little bit, and you're going to want to wipe your brush off. I just kind of wipe it off on the sides of my paint tray here. Probably not the best advice, but you want to be like barely anything and just kind of dab it on his eyes here. Because this is a really small area, dude. Like, you don't need a whole ton of primer or sanding or work to do this, but it's a good precaution to take just so you know it really works. You can see the primer is on his eyes very nicely. I'm really trying to get this to focus for you guys. The primer's on there pretty good. And honestly, I'm going to let mine sit for like a half hour because it's barely any primer, but if I were in your case, just let it sit for a bit longer just to be careful. That's what I'd recommend, but I'm just doing this for the purpose of this video. So let this sit for a while and we'll see if my yellow color works out pretty well. So when you're painting small objects like this, I'm not using a tweezers. I can just hold him by his hat. That's fine. I'm not going to be touching any areas that are being painted, but if you're going to be painting something where you're going to be holding areas that could have paint on them, then I definitely recommend wearing gloves and using tweezers, but that's not our case here, so you're probably fine. But we do want this to focus. That's definitely a problem. So in this scenario, you're just going to want to use like a really small brush, like this one, which is even, it's honestly kind of frayed. You don't really want to use a frayed brush, but I should be fine. Or just use a toothpick. Toothpicks always will never fail. Toothpicks are pretty nice. So I'm just going to put on like one really thin coat. I'm going to brush this off a little bit, make sure I don't have a whole ton of paint on there. And I'll attempt to paint his eyes here. Put it on really thin, dude. I really don't want to mess this up, because it's like, boy, if you get any yellow on his face, that shit is going to stand the fuck out. But I mean, worst case scenario, you just scrape that off a little bit with a toothpick. Toothpicks are very important for this kind of thing, if you haven't noticed already. So we have a little bit of his eye painted there, and we'll zoom through this. Just be careful while you're doing it, man. You don't really want to get paint anywhere on him. So both of his eyes are pretty yellow here for the most part, and about as yellow as I'm going to make them. I don't want to do too much more, so because if you put too many coats on a small area, you're bound to have that paint peel. And I'm just going to give him some black pupils, tiny black dots, just like the 90s and the 60s animated series Goblin. And I'll put up some pictures so you can see what those look like. That's the look I'm going for. I also want to make this bag here a dark green and give him some silver and metallics here, which I already primed the buckles. And I want to make his belt here brown with gold on the front of it. Because I think personally that'll look good, and that's the 90s animated series design, but his belt has a square buckle instead of a circular buckle, but whatever. So we'll work on this here, and I'll show you how to use the toothpick, and then I will fast forward and show you what it all looks like when it's completely finished. Okay, so here I have this open spot with my paint. I'm going to shake up this matte black paint here, and I'm not going to use much. I'm just going to put a tiny little bit there. You can see it's very, very, very thin. So honestly, I don't even think I'm going to thin that, to be completely honest with you. Maybe I'll put a tiny little bit just to be safe here. I thought I had a little bit left. I don't want to put like a whole shit ton just because I do not want this guy's eyes to be all runny when I drip them on. So boom, we have one drip there. So with that one drip, I might put some more black paint just to make sure that it doesn't get all runny. You know, I want it to be kind of thick just because I do not want the eyes to drip down his face and ruin the work I have done. That would be a huge bummer, my guys. So we will mix that up and make sure that it is a good consistency, because we do not want to ruin the work we have done. That would be a real pain in the ass. So I'm mixing this up, making it really, really spread out here. And you can see it's pretty thick, but there's thinner in it, so that's good. So it will stick pretty well. Alright, so it's nice and thin. You can put that away, mix it up in your little bowl of soap and water, make sure it's all good. What I'm going to do is take the toothpick and just boop, a little drip there. And I will show you how this works. So here I've got Norm Osborn. I'm just going to do a little drip in there. I'm going to try to get this dead in the center of his eyes. And hopefully these don't look too wonky, man. That one looks good. That one looks a little bit off. Might have fucked that one up. But that's okay. It's not like you can't redo these things, man. Oh boy, did I put them very... Oh god. Do you see this? Look at this shit. I mean, it's better than what we got, but oh my god, I put them way, way off center. Okay, so I fixed it. I painted yellow over it and then put 2 more black dots. And you can see I put them a lot closer to the corners of his eyes, so make sure you keep that in mind. I know they're big eyes, and I immediately went and put them in the center, like, of this actual eyeball, but you want to make it off-center to the left more, closer to this nose, so it looks like he's looking straight forward and not freaking off in different directions. So that's very important. After that, I will show you how to paint the bag and the belt. I might as well. So I sanded this down really, really lightly, and then I cleaned it, which is obviously very important. And then you want to prime it. And for an object like this, it is okay to go ahead and use a big brush. Just make sure you're not globbing on tons of primer to like just make it a freaking mess, man. You know what I mean? You don't want to make a mess. Just kind of lightly go over it like this. Honestly, you don't need a whole shitload of primer. You know, you don't want the whole thing to be completely white, but you want to get a little bit of primer on there. Like I said, if you put too much primer, this stuff is going to peel off. You don't want to do that. So I'm just kind of lightly putting primer on. Should be good. Get the underside here. And I don't think many people were like, hey, I'm going to go paint the bag. I think everyone really wanted those eyes to be fixed. So, you know, if you want, you can skip ahead to the point where I varnish it. It should be pretty easy to find. I'll drop the numbers below and skip ahead to the varnishing process, because that is also very, very important. Basically, you want to get varnish and make sure you thin the varnish and then cover the eyes after they've dried for a few hours. So it's pretty straightforward, but I'll still show you how to do it, because some of you might still want to see it, and that's totally fine. So I'm going to say I'm pretty good on priming this here. I'm going to paint the inside of it too, though, so I want to prime that. Because if the outside's all green and then the inside's pink, that's going to look kind of silly. God, I'm old. I said silly. That makes me feel ancient. Okay. I'm going to say that's pretty good for primer. That'll dry pretty quick, because again, this really isn't like a huge hefty figure. We're not putting on layer after layer of primer. You don't need to do that. I think this is probably just fine. So what I suggest doing if you want to paint this belt like I do, and you don't have to do it this way, I'm sure there's other ways to do it. You could take tools and take this figure apart if you want, which I'll make a video on disassembling a figure if you would like me to. But I don't really want to disassemble him because it's kind of a process, man. So I'm just going to take this X-Acto knife here, place like a really small cut on his back side of the belt here. And when I'm done, I will super glue this belt back together on his back side here. And I will make sure the belt isn't over any joints that are like, aren't over any articulated parts. Sorry, I'm stumbling on my words here. I'm focusing. Alright, so we're getting pretty close here. We want to just get this belt off without scraping any plastic terribly. Alright, it's off. Very easy. And the reason I'm taking it off is because I want to paint the inside and the outside of it too. So here we have the belt, and you're going to do the same exact thing. Just lightly sand it, get that factory kind of chemicals and shit off of it. Like I said, that's what I've been told. Comment below if you know more than I do, please. Because I never said I was like an expert. I've been doing this my whole life. In fact, I learned how to do this months ago. So, sorry if you can hear ATVs going by. I live in northern Minnesota. Yeah, it ain't the best. It is what it is. And then you just want to scrub it off, which is really easy. You just scrub it off really, really quick. Hopefully you don't see any of this water going everywhere. You dry it off. I'm just drying it off with this little towel here. And honestly, with an object this small, this process might be like a bit extensive. Excessive. I might need to reevaluate what I'm doing here because I might not need to go this hard. So it's all done here, and you just need to take a brush then and prime it. That's what I'm going to do anyways. And I mean, I don't think you could really go wrong with this unless you overkill it with the primer. You might not need to go this far, but you're not going to go wrong going this far, you know. There's no harm done. And a little bit of overkill, unless you really do overkill and freaking cloak this thing in primer, man. Alright. Okay, a little bit of primer there. I want to make sure there's primer on these little parts here, just a little bit, like you don't even have to see it super well. It's likely there. Like I said, you don't want this covered in white. That's what I did my first time when I built my very first model kit, the Bandai Darth Vader. And it was the very first one that doesn't come with the Vader head, the Return of the Jedi head, where he's maskless. And I did a horrendously shit job. And I'm sure there are many people in that boat where, when they're done with this video, they're going to go, what the fuck did I do wrong? And that is okay, man. It's your first time doing it. It's not a perfect process. It definitely takes tweaking, getting a feel for things. It is what it is. So it's pretty much primed. I think that's a pretty fair amount. So we can start painting the bag here. It's been drying for a little while here. So we'll touch this bag up and then, yeah, mix some colors. What we're going to want to do is paint this bag green, okay? We're going to want the buckles to be silver and stuff. We're going to want these side pieces, these metal pieces, to be like a goldish kind of bronze. You can already see they painted one buckle here silver, so I don't know why they didn't do the rest, but it's whatever. And when we go around these small parts here, we're going to use a toothpick too. So let's paint this baby green, and yeah, we'll talk about it when we're done. Okay, so I painted this green. I'm still waiting for this to dry, and I'm waiting for this brown to dry so I can add another coat. But this is pretty much completely done. It did take a lot more than 3 coats. This paint was really thin. I may have thinned it too much. Honestly, these paints just come really thin right off the gate. So first thing I'm going to do is do these little buckles and this little button here. I'm going to take this gray silver. I'm going to shake it up, put it in my paint tray, add a little thinner to it, and then I will get to putting little drops of the toothpick paint onto this area here. Okay, so we're just finishing up Goblin's eyes here. I'll varnish the rest of the stuff after. But now we're going to varnish Goblin. So basically, here's my dilemma. I did a little touch-ups on his face here, which I want to be matte. And I want his eyes to look glossy. So what I'm going to do is do a matte varnish over all of it, I think. And then I will do gloss on the eyes with the with this stuff here all over it. And then I will do another matte coat. And I think that should do the trick. So basically what you're going to do is, it's honestly just like painting the figure, really. So you're just going to find an open spot in your paint thing, shake this up like crazy, make sure you're all good, and dump it in there. You want to thin it out a little bit, not a crazy amount, but you want to thin it out. This goes on there nicely, and then you want to mix it up. So we got to find a nice clean brush that I have, and this one will work. And varnishing is the easiest part of all this, and honestly the most fun second to painting, because it's the finishing touch, man. It's really sealing the deal and making this thing official and one step closer to putting it on your shelf. So I'm going to mix this up here, and I'm going to focus this in on Goblin. I want to dab that off a little bit too, because you don't want to cake it on. If you put it on too thick, you're going to get some really like white spots that'll just look really, really rough. So I'm just going to kind of make it thin there. And I'm going to varnish his face real. See, even now it's pretty runny. But I did quite a bit of touching up here on his forehead and stuff too. And like I said, you don't want it to be white if it's, I mean, it shouldn't be too super white. But there. So now it's varnished here. Very wet looking. See, that definitely has a good amount of varnish on it. I'll brighten this up for you here. So you can see his face a bit better. And it's very wet looking and varnished, so it's cool. So now we'll just sit and wait for that to finish. And I'm going to do the same thing with his bag here. When I varnish it, it's pretty much finished. So I will focus that for you while I varnish this bag. Okay. So the front of it's pretty good. It's quite a bit of varnish too. Alright. Hope you guys can see that alright. I'm trying not to cover it with my hand here and ruin the experience for you guys. That's a bit difficult. So that's pretty much varnished. And keep in mind, I'm not like gonna put it on super heavy, because, and you want to make sure you don't get any hair or anything on it. If you have pets, it's kind of difficult for me, because I have freaking 3 damn cats around here. It's a fucking cat farm, so that's definitely problematic. My clothes are always full of hair and shit. Awful. But just be careful about cat hair or dog hair or anything on your table if it floats around. Make sure you're in a secluded area where you can do this. Honestly, the best place to do this kind of thing is like a garage or outdoors. But that's not too realistic, especially if you're like me and live in Minnesota, and 90% of the time it's literally winter. So, alright. It's not true. We have winter from like, honestly, I'd say November, late October to sometimes May even. You'll see snow on the ground everywhere. Happens. Not unusual, but this past year, 2020, the snow was off the ground by March, so it's been a good year. Alright, so we got that outside part varnished. Now we just need to varnish the inside. And I really want to make sure that these buckles are varnished, just because I worked kind of hard on them. Pay attention to that little detail. You want it to stick and stay. You don't want it to get all messed up. So we should be pretty much good here. I don't want to do overkill on this. Alright. That's good. Let's let those dry for a little bit. And then I'm almost done with the belt here. I just want to put a little more gold because you can see some brown there. But I'm getting pretty close to done with this belt here. Whoops, sorry. It's getting pretty close to done. So I will just add one more coat of gold and that should do the trick. Ooh, that paintbrush is really rock hard. That's not good. I must have used that to varnish or something, the floor polish. So make sure you clean your brushes good so you don't have any problems like I just did. And now it really needs quite a few coats. But I might just leave it at that. That looks pretty decent. Alright, so this belt is painted here. Now we'll let that dry for a bit and then we can varnish that. So that over here, so I know what is what. And now I will do a coat of floor polish on these guys, which works as a beautiful, beautiful sealer varnish. So, and that's easy. It's the same exact process. What you want to do is, this is a bit sticky still. I don't want to do it too soon. But what you want to do, and honestly this stuff ain't gonna harden, so I can probably do it and show you right now. What you're gonna want to do is, like I said, in every other instance, find a nice clear spot in your tray that isn't dirty. This one's a little bit dirty, but you're fine there. It clears out pretty easy. Darken that up. And then what you're gonna want to do is open up this floor polish, which is rock hard for me. And it leaks out pretty fast, so be careful. Alright, I'll shut it here. Alright, so it's closed. And then I'll put some thinner in it. Now mix it up. That will work pretty good. Then when I'm done with this, I will just, close call, I almost put it in primer. Be careful what you're doing, folks. Then when I'm done with this stuff, I will just put the matte varnish on this dude here. This stuff is really clear, really runny. It honestly looks amazing. In my opinion, I love how it looks on these guys. Or just on miniatures or anything in general. It works so nice. Works like a charm. So I'm kind of caking it on him here, but once it dries, they'll look quite a bit better. Just want to make sure it doesn't get too globby here. So, gotta let that dry now. I'll touch it up a little bit, just so I'm covering all the spots. This is really the coat of varnish for me that's the most important because it seems to work the best for me, in my opinion. So I got it on there now. Now we'll just wait for it to dry, and then I will do the purse as well. Alright, so everything is varnished and drying. I'm going to wait for this to dry overnight, and I will tune back into this video in the morning, and we will see how it all looks when I put it back together and put him on his glider, and hopefully we can get some cool shots of him, and hopefully it all turns out good. One thing I do want to show you though is, like I said, be careful with your coats when they're drying. I ended up peeling the corner edge of his little backpack here, and you can see the pink under it. But I'm going to have to touch that up at some point, which is easy to do, man. Once it's all varnished and stuff, it's not like you can't go back and fix stuff, because it's all acrylic, so I mean, you'll likely be fine if you go back once the varnish is dry and paint over it. Just make sure the varnish is dry first. So, anyways, guys, I'll get back to you. Stay tuned, and we'll see how this all looks in the morning. Okay, so Goblin is dry. It is morning now. Well, way past morning. It's the next evening when I recorded before. And the paint is not scraping off, as you can see. It's staying on very nicely. Some of the paint did come off on this corner here, or I just missed it. But all the other parts of this are like rock hard, man. Nothing's coming off. So, and I'm going to say it's because of the pledge. The pledge works really, really well. But aside from that, I think it worked out. Yeah, I think it looks pretty good. I'm very happy with it. I like these smaller pupils personally. I like this belt here. And I like the bag here. But I missed a corner there. Aside from that though, overall this looks very, very nice. And it's a needed update, because the head we got prior to this was kind of rough. So anyways, guys, thank you for watching this. I'm listing all the products I'm using and suggest to use down below in the description, so make sure you go check that out. And I will include all the tools and whatnot, and paints and varnishes and primers and all that fun stuff. And there'll be little links to the Amazon items, so go check that out. Anyways, thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more. I hope this helped you out. If you have any other suggestions or videos or tutorials you'd like to see, please comment and let me know, and I will do them for you. Thanks, guys. Keep collecting. Peace.